Philosophical question for you to consider. As human beings, we're unique from any other animal out there in our ability to be rational and logical and plan for the future. So we like to create plans for ourselves, set goals and what have you, but we are almost always miserable at following those plans. Things never go according to plan. So why is it that we're so good at creating plans but not following them? That is a question we're going to answer in this week's introduction to the Yale philosophy course. Let's get started. Okay, quick disclaimer before we actually start this video. Why am I suggesting we consider our rationality and our ability to follow plans? It's because I created a plan to do this whole Yale philosophy course. It's a 28-week series with the introduction and the outro and all of that stuff. It's going to take a considerable amount of my life to do this, and probably 15 to 20 hours a week to do the homework and the reading and everything else. Well, that is a big plan and a big goal I set for myself, and now I'm feeling completely overwhelmed. I love that I have YouTube to hold me accountable. I've already committed to this. I'm making videos for it. Now I have to do it. So if you are ever trying to set a plan for yourself and you're really excited about something, as you know, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to create some social accountability. Now, you don't need to film yourself doing your goal on YouTube, but definitely tell people in your life that are important to you. With that being said, this is my best attempt to stay committed to this goal. Let's jump into it. The introductory course to the to the Yale philosophy course, this isn't a Readwell thing, it's done by Yale, has been quite fascinating. So there were two reading assignments that you might want to be aware of. So the first comes from the Elements of Philosophy. This is a rather large textbook. Now, I'm not going to be reading this whole thing, at least not in the beginning, but all she had us read was the first 5 or 6 pages, the description being What is Philosophy, written by Simon Blackburn. And it was a really nice read to the idea that in philosophy, what we're doing is we are looking at the view in which we address our life. So think about it this way. You are a person who sees life a certain way, and that is affected by what Simon calls a lens. So if you think about like a camera or whatever, you would look through that lens and you would see a specific picture, right? You might have a lens that is filtered a certain way. That's a good way to think about it, actually. If you were to take a picture of yourself and then add filters to change the color of your hair or the skin tone or what have you, all sorts of weird technology now can make anybody look like anybody. But the point is this: philosophy is not about telling you what you are supposed to be thinking about or what the world should be, but it's about sort of analyzing that lens that you're using to see the world. And it's about showing you that there are different lenses with different properties. So I thought that was a beautiful point to make, and also points out the idea that philosophy is studying these larger, more complex questions related to justice and a creator of some kind, if there is one, and your relationship with that creator, your own understanding of moral virtue and values. Really big, really hard questions. The second read, which I found really, really great, was Predictably Irrational. This is a book by Dan Ariely. He's really well known as a writer. He's really easy to read, and I am so excited to read this whole book. But she only had us read one chapter. It was the chapter titled "The Problem of Procrastination and Self-Control." Can you relate to that? I know I can. So again, at the beginning of this video, pointed out that I am sort of super overwhelmed by taking this course right now, and at the same time very excited, but it is very challenging. And in this book, he points out some of the reasons why we as human beings are procrastinating, and you might find this interesting. So he points out a couple of things. First of all, procrastination comes from the word pro, which is Latin, meaning for, and cras, meaning tomorrow. So in other words, you're for tomorrow. That's what it means to procrastinate. Makes sense? And I also love the idea that he's pointing out that we are often really good in the moment at making plans for ourselves, and that happens when we're what he calls in a cool state, where everything is normal, calm, and we're well put together, and the plan makes perfect sense. But when we get into a heated state, in other words, we get emotional, everything falls apart, and we start to emotionally eat and binge watch Netflix and everything else, and our plans go to total shite, right? That's the problem. So how do you fix this? Well, he gives us a couple different ideas in here, but a few things I want to point out to you. are that we cannot rely on our own motivations to get things done, and instead we need better systems. This kind of sounds like an Atomic Habits sort of thing, if you ask me, with James Clear. But the idea is this. You really need to design a system that you can rely on to help you achieve your goal, so that when crap hits the fan, the system is there to save your butt, really, okay? Now, I want to point out one last thing here. In this chapter, what I really liked about it was the idea that we are not always rational, even though we are rational human beings. And he points out a couple different studies that show how we behave under programmed situations. He references a psychologist named B.F. Skinner. A lot of people know who Skinner is because of the experiments that he did. But one of them was to put rats in a box. Now, I know we're not rats, but hear me out. He put rats in one box with a lever in it, and if they hit the lever a certain amount of predefined times, call it 20 times, boom, 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 up to 20, food would come out of a hole and the rat would get to eat. In the other box, they put rats in there with a lever, and they would hit it an unspecified amount of times and food would come out. So maybe you'd hit it one time and food would come out, and then it would take 100 times until food came out. The interesting question was, which group of rats were more focused on getting food and were harder working? Which rats stayed motivated and continued with it? Well, you might think the rats with the predefined amount of levers were the ones that kept going, because once you learn, all I got to do is hit this thing 20 times, food's going to come out. You would think that would make sense, but in fact, it was the other group of rats. The rats who, for an unspecified amount of time or lever hits, got the food. And then finally, the last idea I want to point out here is that he says that in order to deal with our predictable irrationality, in other words, how to get us to do what we need to do when we don't want to do it, is you really have to make the work fun. Now, stick around, because we're now going to watch part of the lecture that I found the most fascinating, and we're going to do a little narration. I know you're going to love it. Let's jump over to that. Let's jump into the lecture now, and there's a specific philosophical question. She actually shows 3 of them that I think you would just love if you watched the whole lecture, but I'm going to jump into one called the trolley problem. Now, we're going to discuss this in a later class in the course, but for now, she's exposing us to this idea, and it's just really fun to think about, and it sort of is a way for you to examine how you would respond philosophically to a specific situation. So let's watch this now. It's a couple minutes. I will react and respond as she discusses. So here we go.
Second set of topics that we'll address in the course will take off from a particular philosophical example that has become quite popular in contemporary discussions of morality, but which is actually traceable about 40 years old to some writings by Philippa Foot and the philosopher Judith Thomson. And the case with which I suspect some of you are familiar involves a trolley which is hurtling down a track in the direction of 5 people. And if the trolley is not turned, it will hit this group of 5.
Okay, so this is the philosophical problem called the runaway trolley. And as you can see, what's happening here is there's a trolley on a track, and it's about to horrendously run into 5 people and murder them. So that is the philosophical problem.
Now, the question that philosophers like to pose is the following. Suppose that there were a switch which you could use that would divert the trolley so that instead of hitting the 5 people, it would go down a branch track and hit 1. When we have our course clickers, we'll be able to do this scientifically. For now, I just want a show of hands. How many people think it is either morally permitted or morally required, that is either permitted or required, not forbidden, to switch the trolley in such a way that it hits the 1 person rather than the 5? How many?
Okay, so that's the first question, right? Philosophically speaking, you personally, what would you think? Is it permitted to allow this trolley to run its course and smash into the 5 people, or is it okay to flip the switch so that it only murders 1 person? Can you feel good about yourself having murdered just the 1 person? It's a tricky thing, but let's see what happens.
How many people think it is either morally permitted or morally required, that is either permitted or required, not forbidden, to switch the trolley in such a way that it hits the one person rather than the five? How many of you think it's either permitted or required to switch the trolley so that one person dies rather than five? Okay, and how many of you think it's morally forbidden to turn the trolley so that it kills one person rather than five?
Okay, so that makes sense, right? That we're going to have most people in the class feel like it's better to lose one life over five. I think that is a very sort of universal idea that makes most sense. Now is where it gets tricky, so let's pay attention here.
Now, suppose we had a slightly different situation. Instead of the one person being on the track, there is rather a bridge that rests over the trolley track.
I have to pause here for just a minute. So this is what I love about philosophy, that they like to really screw with your mind. But that's good because it makes you sort of see things at a different angle, which is how you learn about yourself and how to interact with other people. And so I like how she said we're going to have a slightly different situation. And I love watching philosophers mess with people. So it's what Socrates loved to do, right? Socrates would stand around in the commons and just question people about their beliefs and help them realize the things that they truly believed were so vital were actually maybe not true. We've got to love Socrates. Okay, let's get going here.
And atop the bridge, a large gentleman of ample girth.
Short, he's fat, big fat guy
such that
on top of a bridge.
Were you
Okay,
to
got that.
dislodge him from his present location using the same switch that you used in the last case, he would be sufficiently weighty to prevent the trolley from hitting the five. How many of you think it is morally required or morally permitted?
Okay, so I'm sure you understand the problem being posed to you here, but again, there's a bridge with a very hefty, weighty, fat guy on top, and now the question isn't if you pull the switch, the train will be diverted to a different path, killing a person. Now, if you pull a switch, it literally pushes the guy off the bridge onto the track so that he gets hit by the train, and he's so big that it keeps the train from hitting the other five people. The same thing is happening. We're losing one life for five, but does it change how you feel about the situation? Let's see what happens.
Five. How many of you think it is morally required or morally permitted to push the fat man off the bridge to prevent the trolley from hitting the five? And how many of you think it is morally prohibited?
Now, I would love to be in this classroom and see who's voting what, but what do you think? What is in your mind morally prohibited? Do you feel it is the same? Do you feel it's different somehow? And if it's different, why? And that's what makes philosophy interesting, because see, what we did is we just switched the lens for you. Before, you were looking at this situation with the lens. Remember, philosophy looks at the lens, at how you view the world. Your lens before was, we're trading one life for five. But now we've pulled that lens out and put a new one in that says, in order to do that, you kind of got to shove a guy in front of the train tracks. And that feels different for a lot of people. It might not for you, but for many people, it will feel a little different.
Hands up again. All right, we have a very, very different spread this time. Now suppose we end up at the hospital and the five who were...
Okay, so it gets worse, by the way, because as a philosopher, we're going to continue messing with your mind and your lenses to show you even more. So now we're going to the hospital. Here we go.
Lying on the tracks, though the trolley didn't hit them, are terribly injured in such a way that one needs a heart, one needs a lung, one needs a leg, one needs an arm, one needs an eye. And in walks a healthy gentleman with exactly the organs required to save the five.
Okay, do you know where this is going yet? So we're in a hospital. We've got five people who are completely incapacitated because they're missing needed organs. And in walks a gentleman who's perfectly healthy, nothing wrong. He's just there to help out at the hospital, whatever. and he has all of the right organs to save these 5 people. See what happens.
How many of you think it is morally required or morally permitted to cut up the one to save the 5?
Okay, notice what she said there. How many of you think it is morally permitted or required? So before, your lens was to save these 5 people, which, the train would either hit a person unjustly or you would have to push somebody in the track. But now you're taking a perfectly unassuming person and and notice she used the word cut up, so it's getting more graphic here. Does that change the way you feel about the situation? And we're still only giving 1 life to save 5. You used to be okay with it if you voted for the train to be diverted. Are you still okay with this concept?
I won't sit with you in the hospital waiting room, those 3 hands. How many of you think it is moral?
So clearly 3 people voted that it was morally okay and required to chop this gentleman up to save 5 people, and she does not feel like that is her vote, and she makes a joke that she wouldn't sit with you in the hospital. Let's carry on.
How many of you think it is morally prohibited? All right.
Okay, so we'll stop it there, but that is really the gist behind what we're going to be getting out of this course in philosophy. This is just the introduction, right? We haven't got into deep reading yet. We haven't got into really convoluted time of sort of rearranging life to get this done. This week, the reading and the writing took me maybe 3 hours, but next week it's going to be far more significant. That's why I'm starting to feel a little nervous, because I looked ahead. But know this, I am very excited to do the work, even though I don't know where I'm going to find the time. I will find the time though, which is why I'm making these videos. I'm committed, mainly because problems like this with the runaway trolley car are fascinating, and I think being exposed to these ideas will affect the way that I do my work, the way that I interchange with my family, and understanding who I am as a person. And this is why philosophy is valuable. So if you find this series interesting and you want to follow along with me as I go through the next 26 or so sessions, I'm going to be doing 1 video a week, and you want to keep up on these philosophical ideas, be exposed to the reading, and get my notes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really shows me that you like what's going on here, and it really helps to promote everything that I'm doing. Thank you for watching, and until next week, happy reading and never, ever stop learning. Thanks, everybody.